In my first installment of Airport Memories, I shared some flying experiences that I've had through the years. The joy of taking others flying is a big motivator for me. I love to watch the reaction. I took you to a place just north of Bolivar, what we call Cloverport International Airport, where you met the Andersons, John V. and Susan, and brother Joe Anderson. You met the judge, Chip Carey. But today, we'll hear from Judy Whitehurst and her daughter, Sharon, on Airport Memories, Bolivar Aviation. Most days, the airport in Bolivar, Tennessee is rather quiet. While it's not a ghost town, I remember the days when this tarmac was filled with airplanes. There were non-stop radio transmissions in the traffic pattern, some even with broken English. Billy Whitehurst took over the Bolivar-Hardeman County Airport late in 1976. He loved to fly, but he had a dream. Billy had big dreams.
He went out and he came back and he was so excited. He said, I want to put in a flight school that's going to be the biggest flight school that ever was. And I said, well, how do you know all this, Billy? He said, because the other morning when I got up and I was drinking coffee, sitting in the den by myself, God told me to do this, really from his heart. And I believed him from that point on, and I joined him, and we did it. From there, Billy purchased a couple of small airplanes and 152s, and he started instructing. And it started growing, and from there it grew and grew.
But how would Billy and Judy recruit students for their new flight school?
We got the bright idea that I would travel to Europe and have meetings and recruit students. And I thought, boy, that's all right with me, I'll do that. So myself and Debbie and Terry went to England, we went to France, we went Germany, we went everywhere. Norway, Sweden, Italy, and we recruited students. And they came and we sold these courses to them.
We had so many students that that Immigration and Naturalization made us a satellite office because we issued the visas. And we had to also keep up with all of the students each month.
We had to hire instructors, we had to buy airplanes. It was a very expensive endeavor to do all this, but yet it was rewarding, and more than just financially for us. It was just somehow the most rewarding thing we have ever done.
Eventually, there were so many airplanes, flight instructors, and students that Billy and Judy had to move part of their operation northward to Jackson, Tennessee.
And we ended up having 100 airplanes and 300 students at any given time. So that's sort of how it started, and we had a marvelous time.
That's everything. The only airport that was busier at one time, because based on takeoffs and landings because of flight school, was Memphis because of FedEx.
We were the largest flight school in the world, privately owned.
He was a pilot's pilot. He could fly almost anything. Billy was an excellent pilot.
And he really brought some new life to
Oh, he did. Yeah, and the Bolivar Airport was really humming back in those days.
At one point, the FAA thought that things were humming just a little too much at the tiny Tennessee airport. Billy Whitehurst wasn't just a flight instructor, he was the FAA designated pilot examiner. In other words, he conducted the check rides and issued the pilot ratings.
Well, the FAA thought Billy was giving too many check rides. Said nobody humanly possible can give that many check rides in a 24-hour period. So I had been to the Sugar Bowl when Tennessee played Miami, and met went down with Walter Broussard, who was a friend of mine, and Fred Thompson was his law partner at the time. Fred wasn't married. He had a date with a girl by the name of Sandy Mitchell. Sandy later married Bill Brock, I think. Well, anyway, get to know them, come back home. About a month after that, Billy calls me up and says, Chip, I'm in trouble. He said the FAA just showed up and took every one of my certificates off the wall, claimed I couldn't give that many check rides in a 24-hour period. Said, what do we do? And I said, well, you're lucky. I just met somebody. So I called Sandy Mitchell and made arrangements. And Billy said, that's fine, that's no problem. And so she put a group together. Former head of General Aviation, the FAA, maybe the former administrator, FAA, a whole bunch of people. In Bolivar, we don't have a fancy terminal. You might say a lean-to onto a building. So they come down, the FAA is coming in out of the regional office in Atlanta, and they're coming to this podunk airport, and they don't know, they're just going to talk to Billy about he's giving too many check rides. They walk into the room, and on the other side of the table, Sandy was a lobbyist for aviation industry and things like that, were all their former bosses. They hung all Billy's certificates back up on the wall and walked out, and that was the end of that. And so Billy was tickled to death, and Billy stayed in business, and nobody ever got hurt. There was no danger, and Billy was completely honest, and he
The flight school grew faster and larger than Billy and Judy ever expected.
We had to house these students, and that was before we built our own apartments out at the airport. And there was a village of apartments called Pecan Village in Bolivar. And we had students there. We had students in empty houses, not that we would provide provisions inside. And they were just all over town. And they were eating at all the restaurants, and they were buying cars. And
it was probably, you might say, one of the largest industries in the county because, see, with the exception of Thies and Crump, which used to be Dover Elevator, we lost Harmon, we lost the tannery. We got Kilgore still over at Tomb, but it was probably the largest industry as far as money coming in. And
Billy Whitehurst followed in the footsteps of his father, Mr. T.A. Whitehurst, one of the first pilots in Hardeman County, Tennessee.
I have a picture of him. He was 79, and Billy brought him out to the airport, and he said, Dad, you think you could fly this airplane? And he'd gotten in the cockpit, and it was an old open cockpit airplane. Next thing we know, he took off in the airplane and went flying.
Sharon Whitehurst Nichols was in college as Billy and Judy launched their new venture. But after college, Sharon joined her parents, not as a flight instructor, but as a stunt pilot.
And I only had 10 hours of flight time when I flew my first air show.
Sharon started flying, but not necessarily to follow in her father's footsteps.
And the reason I started flying is because we had lost Marianne.
17-year-old Marianne Whitehurst was killed in a tragic automobile accident one afternoon after leaving the airport.
And I started flying, you know. I think just as a way to just kind of just heal. And healing it was because, you know, I didn't take the typical, let me get my private, my instrument. Oh, no. Daddy had way other plans for me because he told me I needed to be an air show pilot.
Sharon almost worried me crazy in her daddy, because there she was, just a kid, and he had her in air shows. And I was quite worried about all of that, and I prayed a lot, I can tell you that.
And on the slower days, namely Sunday afternoons, this old conference room table was a gathering spot for old and young pilots alike.
Earl Scruggs used to come on Sundays and sit around with Arthur Wheeler and a lot of the older gentlemen in town, because
Mr. Anderson.
Yes, because as Mom said earlier, the airport started as like a Sunday hangout for a lot of the men in town who would come out and just
Mr. Joe McAnulty.
Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Because he was a World War II pilot. And he would tell all these, I remember that. One local businessman with fond memories of Bolivar Aviation and the Whitehurst family is Hardeman County Mayor Jimmy Sane. Jimmy shares a story about Billy Whitehurst that he'll never forget.
And so Sharon and Paul and I and Kim decided we were going to go to St. Louis on a Thursday and come back on a Sunday and watch a couple of ball games. So we used Billy's twin Seminole, nice little airplane, and Paul, of course, was the instructor. Sharon was the instructor, and I had my pilot's license, but learning to fly a twin-engine plane. So I was in the flight seat, and we flew to St. Louis, spent a couple of days. We got ready to fly back on that Sunday and got in a very bad storm. Got ready to land at Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and the left gear light would not come on. Flew by the tower, banked it up, and he says, "Looks like your gear's out, but it doesn't look like it's locked." So we declared an emergency, and we landed with the gear down. The tire squeaked, and then all of a sudden the left main collapsed. The aircraft turned sideways, and we fought it down the runway in the rain until we couldn't hold it anymore, and it went off side of the runway in the grass and mud and all. And it's quite an experience, especially when you've got your 4-year-olds in the back. When you crash an aircraft, it's report time. The police, state police, ambulance, fire, FAA was on the line, wanted to talk to me from the tower, and I just said, "Wait a minute, guys, I've got to call Billy Whitehurst." And so I called Billy, who was in Florida at the time, and this is classic Billy Whitehurst. I said, "Billy, first of all, there's been an accident, everybody's okay, not a scratch. Your granddaughter is perfectly fine, everything is good, but the gear collapsed on your Seminole, and it's in Cape Girardeau on the side of the runway." It's just a second of hesitation. And then Billy says, "I got one question for you." And I said, "What is it?" And he says, "Did you mess in your pants?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Get you some more pants and rent a car and drive back to Bolivar. Everything's going to be okay." Classic Billy Whitehurst.
I was Billy Whitehurst's first employee when he started Bolivar Aviation.
Billy had this deal with me. We had 2 rental airplanes, a Cessna 150 and a Cessna 172. And Billy told me, since I was the lone employee, he said, "Any airplane that you wash, get it cleaned up, you can take it up and dry it off." So I did. We probably had the cleanest airplanes at any airport in the United States.
My God.
But Billy's most notable employee was a man named Wash. That wasn't his real name. Wash stood for
George Washington Avent. And my dad loved him and my mother loved him, and he just did odd jobs around the airport, filled the planes up with gas, things like that. I guess one night he'd had a little bit too much to drink, and he told all of his friends to come out to the airport the next day because he was going to go do some aerobatics. That he was flying aerobatics and things, and air shows and things
Billy
like
told
that.
him. He said,
And so when Wash comes out the next morning, he goes, "Oh, Mr. Billy, I got drunk last night and I bragged to my friends, and now they're all coming out." And my dad said, "No worries. I'm going to get in the airplane when you see them coming, and I'm going to hide. And you just get in the airplane, and I'll be flying it. And but I'll be crouched down so nobody can see me." So that's what happened. So Wash's friends come out. He gets in the airplane and he brags, "Yeah, I'm going to go up here and do a few things." And Dad's all hiding in the airplane, and he starts it up. And, Wash waves him to him, "Bye," and off they go. And they get up over the top of the airport and do a few aerobatic maneuvers and come back down and land. And Wash gets out of the airplane, and all his friends are totally impressed. And when my dad sold the airport and Mom sold the airport, my dad in the contract had a clause that Wash could never be fired, and he always had to be provided for. Really? Yes.
So what is the legacy of Bolivar Aviation and the Whitehurst family?
I think that we have left the legacy of, of aviation and creating a career for a lot of people. We were one of the first schools that offered a complete package. You could come here and start from zero and leave with a skill, and a skill that would carry you through the rest of your life. No matter if you wanted to go work with the airlines, or hey, if you just retire from your job and you can go and be a flight instructor in later years, or just be a Sunday afternoon pilot. And I just think that it opened up a skill and it made it available to the average person.
Billy and Judy Whitehurst were simply people who loved to fly. They wanted others to have that opportunity as well, and made it possible through Bolivar Aviation.
And I remember flying back, he said, Tim, have you ever rolled a 172? I'm like, looked at him, I'm like, no, Billy, I've never rolled a 172. Let me see it. And he put it in just a little bit of a descent, and he pulled it up and just did a nice little barrel roll. We never came out of the seats. It was just perfect roll, and I had no clue that you could roll a Cessna 172, but Billy showed me that it could be done.
I think that the airport, it was serious, but it was always uplifting, and it was always a positive thing for everybody. So, I mean, you know, we just had a lot of fun, and a lot of people would come and go and have their planes, and it was great.
I get the throttle and pull back and kill the other engine, and we go into a flat spin. But at 2,200 feet, it oscillated sort of, and Billy said, well, we're going in, but I'm going to give it all I got. And when it sort of did that, somehow, by a miracle of God, I always say, we got out of it, and we were just like coming down to 1,200 feet by then. And that's the worst thing I think I was ever in an airplane.
You know, that's back when you and I were kids out there flying together, and man, that was the great days. But, you know, Billy Whitehurst was my hero. And so, man, every chance I had, I hung around at the Bolivar Airport. He had the world's largest small Cessna dealership at one time. And so he was giving me all the opportunities to learn to fly. And they were about to start a flight school. And Judy was my instructor. And she said, I'm going to finish Jimmy Sane, and then we're going to hire our own instructors here, you know, for the flight school. So I love Judy Whitehurst, one of the best instructors that anybody could ever have.
But Billy had a flight school. You could come out there who'd never been in an airplane before, and you could leave as an ATP with your airline transport pilot's license, and Billy could administer the test on site. So it was a tremendous economic boom to the county. About 3 o'clock in the morning, we had a guy from England, and he'd been in the military, or maybe still was in the military or something like that, and he was out jogging at 3 o'clock in the morning with his combat boots on in Bolivar, and they thought he was an escapee from the Western Hospital, and so Billy had to get that taken care of and tell him, no, he's one of my students, he's not a patient. So.
Can you kind of you cut it out if it's not good?
Absolutely. You watch me. You haven't seen me edit before.
Helped me enough that I felt like I could put it on the ground if something happened. Thankfully, I never had to. But
it was fun flying with Billy Whitehurst. He was a character. He would put me up to prank calling people. Those were the days before we had caller ID, and you could call and prank call people. So even in those days, Billy was still a prankster. He loved to have fun with people. He just enjoyed life.
Mom gets a phone call, Dad gets a phone call about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning from the Memphis Police Department. I guess 2 of the students had gone down to the Peabody and had a really good time. And they decided there are 2 huge gold or brass elephants. And they decided they needed those. and tried to steal them out of the lobby of the Peabody Hotel.
They were drinking.
And so I don't know how Billy Whitehurst got those guys out of jail, but they were home the next morning.